If you can hit this note, I'll make you the queen of the district. If you fail, you belong to me for 10 years, and I promise you, you won't survive the first one. The room freezes. They call him the Syndicate Heir, a man who manages empires with a whisper and ends lives with a glance. But tonight, Jun-Su doesn't want blood, he wants a show. He looks at the trembling waitress who just ruined his $3,000 suit with a spilled pot of tea and offers a wager that is as cruel as it is impossible. He thinks he's found a new toy to break. He doesn't know that beneath that stained uniform beats the heart of Aruso Kim. He doesn't know that the girl holding the porcelain shard is the only person in Seoul who can bring his world to its knees. The rain in Seoul was relentless that night, hammering against the tinted glass of the Gilded Crane, the most exclusive supper club in the Gangnam district. To the public, it was a Michelin-starred sanctuary for the elite. To those who knew the truth, it was neutral ground for the East Coast's most dangerous crime families. Soyeon Ruso Kim adjusted the collar of her stiff white uniform, her fingers trembling slightly. She had been working here for 6 months, and the terror never quite faded. She was 24 with tired eyes and hands that were rough from scrubbing floors during her day shift at a diner in Incheon. Here, she was a ghost, an invisible servant meant to pour tea, clear plates, and never, ever make eye contact. Table 4 needs a refill on the daebakcha now, Ruso Kim, the floor manager hissed into her ear. And for God's sake, don't look at them. The Syndicate Heirs are in a mood. Soyeon's stomach turned to ice. Everyone knew Jun-Su. He wasn't just a mob boss, he was a titan of industry whose legitimate shipping empire was just as vast as his underground network. He was 32, devastatingly handsome, with sharp features and eyes the color of cold steel. She walked toward table 4, balancing the heavy porcelain pot. The table was surrounded by men in dark suits, but Jun-Su sat at the head, looking like a bored king on a throne. He was twirling a silver lighter between his fingers, staring blankly at the empty stage where a soprano was supposed to be. "Where is she?" Jun-Su asked, his voice low. He didn't shout, which made it scarier. "Traffic, boss," one of his capos muttered. "The storm." Jun-Su stopped twirling the lighter. "I don't care about the storm. I paid for perfection." Soyeon reached the table. She knew the drill, pour from the right, disappear to the left. But as she leaned in to fill Jun-Su's cup, a sudden vibration from a slammed fist shook the table. Soyeon gasped as the heavy porcelain pot slipped from her sweat-slicked grip. Time seemed to slow down. The pot hit the edge of the table, shattering. A wave of dark tea exploded outward, drenching the pristine white tablecloth and splashing directly onto the lap of Jun-Su's $3,000 bespoke charcoal suit. The entire restaurant went silent. Soyeon stood paralyzed, her face draining of all color. She had just assaulted the most dangerous man in Seoul with a pot of tea. Jun-Su didn't move. He simply looked down at the stain, then slowly lifted his eyes to meet hers. His gaze was terrifyingly calm. I am so sorry, sir." Soyeon's voice was a dry croak. "I'll get a towel." "Stop," Jun-Su said. She froze. He stood up slowly, towering over her. He reached out and picked up a sharp shard of the broken porcelain from the table. "You know," he said, addressing the room but keeping his eyes on her. "I've had a very disappointing night. My singer is missing, and now a clumsy waitress has ruined a suit that costs more than her life's earnings." He stepped closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne, tobacco, and rain. A cruel smirk twisted his lips. "Let's play a game," Jun-Su said. He gestured to the empty stage. "You ruined the music, so you replace it. If you can sing an aria that doesn't make my ears bleed, you walk out of here with your life." He laughed, a dark, humorless sound. "Heck, if you're actually good, I'll marry you right here tonight." The man at the table chuckled nervously. It was a cruel, impossible joke. A waitress couldn't sing opera. "And if I can't?" Soyeon asked, her voice trembling. Jun-Su's smile vanished. "Then you work off the debt of this suit in my private club for the next 10 years. A collective gasp rippled through the room. That was a sentence to slavery. Soyeon looked at the stage, then back at Jun-Su. Deep down, buried under the exhaustion, he saw a spark of defiance. She nodded once. Deal. Soyeon's legs felt like lead as she moved toward the stage. Each step on the polished hardwood felt like a walk toward a gallows, the eyes of Seoul's most dangerous men boring into her back. She stepped up onto the platform, the spotlight blinding her momentarily, casting the rest of the room into a predatory darkness. Behind her, the pianist, an elderly man with a face like crumpled parchment, looked at her cheap, tea-stained uniform and scoffed. "Girl, get down before you get hurt," he muttered, his fingers hovering over the keys. "Do you know Mozart?" Soyeon whispered, her voice suddenly turning steel-hard. "The Magic Flute. Der Holly Rake." The pianist's eyebrows shot up. He knew the piece, the Queen of the Night's aria. It was a vocal minefield, a composition of such logic-defying range and technical difficulty that even world-class sopranos feared it. To attempt it as an amateur wasn't just brave, it was suicide. "If you insist," he muttered, shaking his head as he began the rapid, angry intro. Soyeon closed her eyes. She didn't think about the gangsters or the debt. She thought about her father, Luciano Russo Kim, and the Gilead rejection letter she had hidden under her mattress because they couldn't afford the tuition. She thought about the years of practice in a cramped basement while the world outside forgot her name. She wasn't just a waitress anymore, she was a weapon. At the table, Jun-Su swirled his drink, not even looking at the stage. He was already signaling his men to prepare the car, bored of the charade. Then, Soyeon opened her mouth. The first note didn't just ring out, it exploded. It was a strike of lightning, clear, resonant, and ferociously powerful. Jun-Su's hand froze mid-air, the silver lighter slipping from his fingers. Soyeon wasn't singing with fear, she was singing with a hellish fury. The aria was a command for vengeance, and she poured every ounce of her life suffering into the melody. Her voice soared, hitting the impossible high notes with terrifying precision. The staccato runs, those famous machine gun pitches, were executed with a menacing speed that made the hair on the back of Jun-Su's neck stand up. The room didn't just go silent, it ceased to breathe. Jun-Su slowly turned his head. The trembling girl who had spilled his tea was gone. In her place was a Valkyrie in a waitress uniform. Her eyes were squeezed shut, her hands clenched into fists at her sides as she navigated the treacherous vocal acrobatics. She wasn't looking for his approval, she was declaring war on the world that had underestimated her. As she hit the final, high-resolving note, she held it longer than seemed humanly possible, the sound vibrating the crystals in the chandeliers. When she finally cut the note off, the silence was heavy, almost painful. Soyeon opened her eyes, sweat trickling down her temple, and looked straight at Jun-Su. For 10 seconds, no one moved. Then, Jun-Su stood up. He didn't smirk. He looked stunned, his predatory curiosity replaced by something far more intense. He began to clap, slowly at first. Then the rest of the room followed, the applause swelling into a roar that shook the walls of the gilded crane. "You didn't tell me," Jun-Su said, walking toward the stage as the crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. "Tell you what?" Soyeon asked, her voice shaking now that the music had left her. "That you are a weapon," he whispered, reaching into his pocket. He didn't pull out a wedding band, but a heavy family signet ring, the mark of his protection. He placed it on the stage floor at her feet. "I am a man of my word. I said if she could sing, I'd marry her." The applause was still ringing in the rafters when a heavy, rhythmic thud echoed from the back of the room. It wasn't hands clapping, it was the sound of a cane, topped with a silver dragon's head, striking the floor. The crowd parted like a wounded animal clearing the way for a predator. Out of the shadows emerged Elder O. He was a man who seemed more like a collection of ancient, yellowed parchment and sharp angles than a human being. His reptilian eyes were hooded, flickering with a cold, analytical light that made the warm success of the performance vanish instantly. Jun-Su's posture shifted. He didn't lose his cool, but his hand moved instinctively toward the signet ring he had just placed at Soyeon's feet. "Elder O," Jun-Su greeted, his voice dropping an octave. "I didn't realize the head of the 7 stars was dining with us tonight." Elder O ignored him. He walked straight to the edge of the stage, stopping inches from Soyeon. He didn't look at her uniform or the tea stains, he looked at the bridge of her nose, the curve of her jaw, and finally, deep into her dark, defiant eyes. A flicker of recognition passed over his face, a momentary twitch of a muscle that, on any other man, might have been a smile. Soyeon, the old man rasped. His voice sounded like dry leaves skittering over a grave. A beautiful name, though I suspect the name Russo Kim carries a weight you've been trying to bury under stacks of dirty dishes. Soyeon felt the blood drain from her extremities. Her father had always told her to keep her head down, to never let the old ghost see her face. You have his lungs, Elder O continued, his eyes narrowing. And your mother's stubborn pride. I haven't seen that look since the night the docks at Busan went up in flames 20 years ago. Jun-Su stepped between them, his predatory curiosity now fully piqued. He sensed the shift in the room's gravity. You know her family, Elder? I knew her father, Elder O said, his gaze shifting to Jun-Su. He was a man who knew too much about a certain shipment of delicate cargo that went missing. I thought the bloodline was extinguished. To find the daughter of Luciano Russo Kim serving tea in your club, Jun-Su, it is a poetic coincidence. Or perhaps, a divine threat. The atmosphere in the club turned from celebratory to lethal. The syndicate members at the tables began to reach for their jackets. They knew that if Elder O was interested in a waitress, she wasn't just a girl anymore, she was a liability. She is my fiancée, Jun-Su stated, his voice ringing out like a challenge. He reached up, grabbed Soyeon's hand, and pulled her down from the stage. Which means whatever cargo you're talking about is now my business, too. Elder O leaned heavily on his cane, his reptilian eyes locking onto Soyeon one last time. Then I hope you've taught her to do more than sing, Jun-Su. Because in my world, a pretty voice is just a siren song that leads to a shipwreck. You've claimed a prize you don't understand. As Elder O turned and limped out of the club, Jun-Su leaned into Soyeon's ear, his grip on her hand bruisingly tight. Start talking, Soyeon, he whispered. Because you just became the most hunted woman in South Korea, and I'm the only one holding the leash. The penthouse office of the Moretti-Jun Tower was a temple of glass and cold marble, overlooking a Seoul that looked like a circuit board of neon lights. The silence inside was absolute, broken only by the soft clink of ice against crystal as Jun-Su poured 2 fingers of amber whiskey. Soyeon stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, still wearing the stained waitress uniform, though Jun-Su's heavy gold signet ring felt like a lead weight in her palm. She didn't look like a future bride, she looked like a prisoner of war. Sit, Jun-Su commanded, gesturing to a leather chair that cost more than her father's funeral. Soyeon didn't sit. She turned, her eyes narrowed. You told the room we were engaged. You used me to insult Elder O. I want to know why a crime lord who can have any woman in this city is suddenly pretending to marry a girl who smells like dishwater and cheap tea. Jun-Su paused, the glass halfway to his lips. He walked toward her, his movements smooth as velvet, stopping only when he was close enough for her to see the predatory curiosity dancing in his dark pupils. I don't pretend, Soyeon. It's a waste of energy, he said, his voice dropping to a low vibration. Elder O is a relic. He controls the old docks and the delicate cargo, human trafficking. My family wants the port clean for legitimate trade. Your father wasn't just a tenor, he was the whistleblower who had the ledger for O's 2004 shipments. That ledger disappeared when he was disgraced and silenced. Soyeon's breath hitched. My father was a good man. He didn't know anything about crime. He knew enough to get murdered, Jun-Su countered sharply. And Elder O just confirmed that you are the key to finding what he left behind. If you walk out that door, you're a corpse by sunrise. But as my wife? You're a sovereign power. No one touches the woman who carries the Jun-Su name. Soyeon looked at the signet ring. This is a business arrangement. A contract. Precisely, Jun-Su smirked, leaning against his desk. I provide the protection and the resources to clear your father's name. In return, you provide the face of the reformed syndicate. You sing at the events I tell you to. You play the role of the devoted fiancé to draw Elder O out of his hole. And when he's gone? I want my life back, Soyeon interrupted. I want the record cleared. I want the Russo Kim name restored to the opera house, not the police blotter. Jun-Su studied her for a long moment, surprised by the steel-hard resolve in her voice. He reached out, his thumb brushing the pulse point on her wrist, which was hammering like a trapped bird. Deal, he whispered. But there's one rule, Soyeon. In front of the cameras and the families, you have to look like you love me. You have to look like you'd burn the city down for me. Can a waitress from Incheon act that well? Soyeon slipped the oversized gold ring onto her finger. It was cold against her skin. I've been acting like I'm just a waitress for 10 years, Jun-Su. This will be the easiest performance of my life. Jun-Su's smirk widened into a genuine, dangerous smile. Good. Tomorrow, we start your transformation. You're done serving tea. From now on, you're the queen of the district. The following morning did not begin with a romantic breakfast, but with a tactical invasion. At 6 a.m., a team of 3 stylists and 2 grim-faced security guards entered Soyeon's temporary quarters at the Moretti-Jun Tower. By 8 a.m., the ghost of Incheon was being scrubbed away. The skin is too pale, the hands are a disaster, the lead stylist sked, dipping Soyeon's hands into a warm paraffin wax. But the bone structure, it is aristocratic. We can work with this. Soyeon sat stoically as her hair was treated and her uniform was replaced by a robe of heavy silk. She wasn't thinking about the beauty treatments, she was thinking about the suitcase Jun-Su had delivered an hour ago. It was her father's old leather trunk, retrieved from police evidence storage where it had sat gathering dust for a decade. Jun-Su entered the room, leaning against the doorframe. He had traded his suit for a black turtleneck, looking less like a CEO and more like a predator in repose. He watched as the stylists began applying a subtle, lethal makeup look to Soyeon's face. You look like you're preparing for an execution, not a wedding, he remarked. In your world, is there a difference? Soyeon countered, her voice cool. Jun-Su signaled the stylists to leave. Once the door clicked shut, he walked over to the leather trunk. I had my tech team go through it. They found nothing. No ledgers, no hidden compartments. Are you sure your father was the man Elder O thinks he was? Soyeon stood up, her new silk robe flowing around her. She knelt by the trunk, her fingers tracing the worn brass latches. My father was a man of music, Jun-Su. He didn't hide things in compartments. He hid things in plain sight. She reached into the side pocket of the trunk and pulled out a stack of weathered sheet music. It was a handwritten score for Don Giovanni. To a mobster, it was scrap paper. To Soyeon, it was a map. Look at the notations, she whispered, pointing to the margins. Underneath the Italian lyrics, there were tiny, meticulous sequences of numbers disguised as metronome markings and tempo shifts. 120. 42. 88, those aren't beats per minute, Jun-Su said, his eyes narrowing as he leaned in. Those are coordinates. Or shipping container IDs, Soyeon added, her heart hammering against her ribs. My father didn't just see the cargo, he logged it into the music he sang every night. This isn't just a score, Jun-Su. It's a confession. Suddenly, the flicker of recognition she had seen in Elder O's eyes made sense. He hadn't just recognized her face, he was terrified of what she might remember from her father's rehearsals. Jun-Su reached out, his hand covering hers on the sheet music. The predatory curiosity in his gaze was now replaced by a cold, calculating fire. If we decode this, we don't just stop Elder O. We dismantle his entire empire from the inside out. But first, Soyeon said, standing up and meeting his gaze, we have a gala to attend. And I believe the rules of engagement require me to look like I'm hopelessly in love with the man holding the leash. Jun-Su's grip on her hand tightened, not in a threat, but in a sudden, strange moment of alignment. Then let's go give them the performance of a lifetime. The grand ballroom of the Latte Hotel was a sea of black tuxedos and shimmering silk, a gathering of the city's most dangerous predators masked as philanthropists. When the door swung open, the ambient chatter died instantly. Soyeon didn't walk into the room, she occupied it. She wore a gown the color of dried blood, a deep, bruised crimson that clung to her frame like armor. Her hair, once pulled into a frantic waitress's bun, now cascaded down her back in polished waves. On her finger, Jun-Su's signet ring caught the light of the chandeliers, a golden promise of violence to anyone who dared cross her. Jun-Su stood at her side, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. "Keep your chin up," he murmured, his breath ghosting over her ear. "You aren't a waitress tonight. You are the woman who owns my debt." "I feel like a target in red," Soyeon replied, her smile fixed and porcelain perfect for the photographers. "In this room, Soyeon, if you aren't the target, you aren't important." They hadn't walked 20 paces before the crowd parted to reveal Elder O. He sat in a high-backed velvet chair, his silver-headed cane resting between his knees. Surrounding him were 3 men Soyeon recognized from her father's old photos, the cleaners of the 7-star Syndicate. "The phoenix rises from the dishwater," Elder O rasped, his reptilian eyes scanning her from head to toe. "A stunning transformation, Jun-Su. But even a crow can be painted gold. It doesn't mean it can fly." "She isn't a crow, Elder," Jun-Su said, his voice dropping to that smooth-as-velvet tone that signaled a coming storm. "She's the new voice of the Jun-Su Empire. And I believe you have something that belongs to her." Elder O's expression didn't flicker. "I have many things. But tonight, I have a gift for the bride-to-be." He snapped his fingers. One of his men stepped forward, holding a tray with a single, antique glass of wine. "In the old traditions," O continued, "we toast to the union of families with the wine of the ancestors. If the bride refuses, it is an admission that her bloodline is unworthy." The room went deathly silent. This was the first trap. In the Syndicate world, the wine of the ancestors was often laced with a slow-acting paralytic, not enough to kill, but enough to make the victim collapse in public, shattering their reputation and proving their weakness. Soyeon looked at the glass. She saw the faint, oily sheen on the surface. She looked at Jun-Su, whose jaw was set in a hard line. He couldn't intervene without looking like he was protecting a fragile toy. Soyeon reached out. But instead of drinking, she took the glass and walked toward the center of the ballroom floor, where a string quartet was playing. She signaled them to stop. "Elder O is right," Soyeon's voice rang out, projecting with the operatic power she had honed in secret. "Tradition is everything. But in my family, we don't toast with wine. We toast with truth." She raised the glass high, then tipped it slowly, pouring the dark liquid onto the white marble floor. The acidic scent of the chemical additive filled the air. "My father died because he wouldn't drink the lies you served him, Elder," she said, her eyes burning with a ferociously powerful light. "I'm not here to join your traditions. I'm here to rewrite them." She shattered the glass at her feet, echoes of the porcelain shard from Chapter 1. The message was clear, the waitress was gone. The war had begun. The shattering of the glass was still echoing when Elder O leaned forward, his face inches from Soyeon's. The reptilian eyes didn't blink. The mask of the polite elder had slipped, revealing the cold, predatory soul of a man who had built an empire on the silence of the dead. "You have a flair for the dramatic, child," he whispered, loud enough only for her and Jun-Su to hear. "But remember this, your father's truth didn't save him from the bottom of the Han River. It only made him a ghost. You are walking the same path, wearing a red dress that looks remarkably like a funeral shroud." Jun-Su's hand tightened on Soyeon's waist, a silent signal of restraint. "The difference, Elder, is that she isn't walking it alone. And unlike the men you're used to dealing with, I don't find truth inconvenient. I find it profitable." Elder O let out a dry, rattling cough that might have been a laugh. He stood up, his cane tapping rhythmically against the marble, right next to the puddle of tainted wine. "We shall see. The 7 stars don't forget debts, Jun-Su. And I believe the Russo Kim family owes me a very specific piece of paper." He turned and vanished into the crowd of vultures, leaving a trail of icy tension in his wake. Jun-Su pulled Soyeon toward a private alcove behind a heavy velvet curtain. The smooth-as-velvet facade dropped instantly. "That was a dangerous move, Soyeon. If you hadn't spotted the oil in that wine, you'd be convulsing on the floor right now. I spent 6 months serving men like him in Incheon, Soyeon snapped, her adrenaline finally spiking. I know the smell of a trap. But he gave me something better than wine. He gave me the location. Jun-Su frowned. He didn't say a word about the ledger. Not with his voice, Soyeon said, her eyes bright with the ferociously powerful spark she had discovered on stage. When he mentioned the wine of the ancestors and the Busan docks, he kept looking at the signet ring on my finger. My father didn't have a safe or a bank box. He had a locker at the Busan Opera House, the one labeled with the debut date of his first performance, Don Giovanni, 2004. She pulled the handwritten sheet music from her clutch, pointing to the coordinates they had found in Chapter 5. The coordinates don't lead to a ship. They lead to the foundation of the old stage. The missing cargo isn't on the water, Jun-Su. The records of the human trafficking shipments are buried under the very floorboards where my father used to sing. Jun-Su looked at her, the predatory curiosity in his eyes softening into genuine respect. He realized then that Soyeon wasn't just a partner in a business marriage, she was the smartest person in the room. Then we leave for Busan tonight, Jun-Su said, his voice hard. Before Elder O realizes he said too much by saying nothing at all. The black armored sedan tore through the rain-slicked outskirts of Seoul, heading south toward Busan. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of ozone and expensive leather. Jun-Su sat behind the wheel, his eyes fixed on the road, while Soyeon clutched the handwritten sheet music to her chest like a shield. We're being followed, Jun-Su said, his voice smooth as velvet but laced with a lethal edge. He didn't look at the rearview mirror, he didn't have to. He could feel the vibration of engines that didn't belong to civilian cars. Soyeon looked back. Through the curtain of rain, several sets of high-intensity LED headlamps appeared, weaving through the midnight traffic with terrifying precision. Elder O? His locusts, Jun-Su replied, his foot pressing harder on the accelerator. Motorcycle assassins. They don't stop until the target is cold. Suddenly, the roar of engines grew deafening. 4 motorcycles pulled alongside the sedan, the riders clad in matte black armor. One of them reached into a side holster and pulled out a compact submachine gun. Rat-tat-tat-tat. The bullet sparked against the reinforced glass of the passenger window, inches from Soyeon's head. She let out a choked gasp, ducking low. Stay down. Jun-Su commanded. He swerved the heavy car, attempting to ram one of the bikes into the concrete median, but the rider was too fast, skidding back with feline agility. They're trying to blow the tires, Jun-Su hissed. If we flip, they take the ledger and leave us in the wreckage. We can't let them have it, Soyeon said, her steel-hard resolve surging through the terror. She looked at the dashboard and then at the window. Jun-Su, the tunnel. The Namseol tunnel is 2 miles ahead. If you can get us inside, I can give you an opening. An opening? Soyeon, they have guns. And I have a voice that can shatter crystal, she countered, her eyes flashing with a ferociously powerful light. In an enclosed space like a tunnel, with the right frequency, I can distract them long enough for you to take them out. Jun-Su didn't argue. He shifted gears, the engine roaring in protest as the car hit 160 kilometers per hour. They plunged into the orange-lit maw of the tunnel. The sound of the motorcycles echoed off the tiled walls, amplifying into a deafening drone. Now! Jun-Su yelled. Soyeon grabbed the car's internal intercom, a high-fidelity system designed for Jun-Su's secure calls, and cranked the gain to its maximum. She didn't sing a melody this time. She unleashed a piercing, sustained high E-flat, the same note that had stunned the room at the club, but fueled now by the raw adrenaline of a woman fighting for her life. The sound, amplified by the car's external speakers and the natural acoustics of the tunnel, created a wall of sonic pressure. The nearest rider, caught off guard by the literal weaponized frequency, lost his balance. His bike wobbled violently as he clutched at his helmet in agony. Jun-Su didn't miss the chance. He slammed the steering wheel to the right, his car clipping the lead bike and sending it spinning into the tunnel wall in a shower of sparks. 3 left, Jun-Su muttered, his predatory curiosity turning into grim admiration as he glanced at the girl beside him. The waitress wasn't just his fiancée, she was his most dangerous asset. The safe house was a brutalist concrete bunker hidden beneath an abandoned textile factory on the outskirts of Daegu. The air inside was cold and smelled of damp earth and industrial grease. As the heavy steel door groaned shut behind them, the adrenaline that had sustained Jun-Su during the chase finally evaporated. He stumbled, his shoulder catching the doorframe. A sharp hiss of pain escaped his teeth. Jun-Su. Soyeon dropped the leather trunk, rushing to catch him. As she supported his weight, her hand came away warm and slick. In the dim emergency lighting, her palm was stained a terrifying crimson. A stray bullet from the tunnel had found the gap in his door's armor, grazing his side. "It's nothing," he grunted, though his face was the color of ash. "Just a scratch from the locusts." "Sit." "Now," Soyeon commanded. The invisible servant was gone. In her place was a woman who had spent years caring for a dying father with no money for hospitals. She guided him to a wooden crate, the only furniture in the room besides a cot and a workbench. She found a first aid kit and a bottle of high-proof vodka on a shelf. The transition was jarring. The high society heir, usually draped in Italian silk, was now shivering in a dark basement, his life literalizing the blood and vodka reality of the underworld. "I need to see the wound," she said. Her hands didn't tremble this time. Jun-Su pulled his black turtleneck over his head. The sight of his torso, covered in a map of old scars and a fresh, jagged tear along his ribs, made Soyeon's breath hitch. He looked at her, his predatory curiosity replaced by a raw, naked vulnerability. For the first time, the power imbalance had flipped. He was the one at her mercy. She unscrewed the vodka. "This is going to hurt." "I felt worse," he whispered, though he gripped the edge of the workbench until his knuckles turned white. As she poured the spirit over the wound to disinfect it, he let out a low, guttural growl, his head falling back against the wall. Soyeon worked with clinical precision, using a curved needle to close the skin. To distract him, she began to hum, not the aggressive, weaponized notes of the tunnel, but a soft, mournful lullaby her father used to sing when the world felt too heavy. The tension in Jun-Su's shoulders began to bleed away. He watched her through half-lidded eyes, captivated by the contrast of her bloody hands and her angelic voice. "Why didn't you leave?" he asked, his voice a raspy shadow of its usual self. "When the bikes hit the car, you could have jumped out. You could have run from me and Elder O both." Soyeon tied the final stitch and looked up, her face inches from his. "Because for 10 years I've been running, Jun-Su. I'm tired of being a ghost. And because..." She hesitated, her thumb brushing the skin near his wound. "You're the first person who didn't just see a waitress. You saw a weapon. I'd rather be a weapon than a victim." Jun-Su reached up, his hand cupping the back of her neck, pulling her just a fraction closer. The business marriage felt 1,000 miles away. In this cold, dark bunker, the only thing that was real was the heat between them and the shared scent of iron and alcohol. "You aren't just a weapon, Soyeon," he murmured. "You're the symphony." The fog in Busan harbor was thick enough to swallow a manhole. It clung to the towering cranes and rusted shipping containers like a damp shroud. Jun-Su, his side heavily bandaged but his movements once again smooth as velvet, led Soyeon through the labyrinth of the pier. They were no longer the heir and his bride, they were two ghosts moving through a graveyard of steel. "There she is," Jun-Su whispered, pointing toward a hulking silhouette moored at the edge of the deepest berth. The name on the hull was barely legible through the grime, the SS Titan. It wasn't just a cargo ship, it was a floating fortress. Armed guards with the 7 stars insignia on their jackets paced the deck, their breath blooming in the cold air. "My father's ledger says the human cargo is moved during the 3rd watch," Soyeon said, checking the silver locket she had retrieved from her trunk, a memento that held a tiny, hand-drawn map of the ship's internal ventilation. "If we can reach the hold through the ballast tanks, we can find the evidence before the shipment leaves." They moved with practiced silence, slipping into the oily water of the harbor to avoid the thermal cameras at the gangplank. The water was bone-chilling, but Soyeon barely felt it. The steel-hard resolve she had found in the safe house was now a roaring fire in her chest. They scaled the intake pipes and squeezed through a narrow maintenance hatch. Inside, the ship groaned like a dying beast. The air was stagnant, smelling of salt, diesel, and fear. As they navigated the narrow catwalks above the main hold, Soyeon looked down and gasped. Below them, dozens of people, men, women, and children, were being herded into shipping containers disguised as industrial equipment. This wasn't just crime, it was an atrocity. Elder O isn't just a mobster, Soyeon whispered, her voice trembling with a ferociously powerful rage. He's a monster. And monsters thrive in the dark, Jun-Su replied, pulling a compact detonator from his tactical vest. I'm going to disable the engines. You stay here, record the IDs on those containers, and get to the communications room. We need to broadcast this to every news outlet in the country. The Syndicate can survive a shootout, but they can't survive the light. Jun-Su, wait, Soyeon grabbed his arm. The guards, there are too many. He looked at her, the predatory curiosity in his eyes replaced by a grim, protective warmth. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. Then I'll make enough noise to keep them busy. You just make sure they hear you, Soyeon. Use that weapon of yours. He vanished into the shadows of the engine room, leaving Soyeon alone on the catwalk, but as she turned to reach the comms deck, the heavy thud of a silver-headed cane echoed against the metal floor. I told you, child, Elder O's voice rasped from the darkness of the bulkhead. A pretty voice only leads to a shipwreck. A dozen red laser dots appeared on So. The air in the cargo hold was thick with the scent of ozone and the damp, metallic tang of the ship's interior. Soyeon stood on the narrow metal grating, surrounded. Elder O stepped out from the shadows, his silver-headed cane clicking rhythmically against the steel floor. Behind him, Jun-Su was being held by two massive guards, his face bruised and a fresh trail of blood leaking from his bandaged side. You were a fool to come here, little songbird, Elder O rasped, his reptilian eyes gleaming with a sickly triumph. Your father thought he could change the world with a melody. He died in the dark, just as you will. But first, you will give me the ledger. Soyeon looked at Jun-Su. Even in his weakened state, his eyes burned with a predatory curiosity that had turned into a silent command, fight. I don't have the ledger, Elder, Soyeon said, her voice dropping into a low, resonant register. But I have something my father left me that's much more dangerous. She noticed the heavy industrial PA system mounted on the bulkheads, intended for emergency announcements. Slowly, her hand drifted to the small wireless microphone she had swiped from the comms room, a high-output device meant for long-range ship-to-shore hailing. A song? Elder O mocked, gesturing for his men to close in. The Seven Stars do not fear music. They should, Soyeon whispered. She clicked the microphone on and held it inches from her lips. She didn't sing a lullaby. She didn't sing for the elite at the Gilded Crane. She drew a breath that seemed to pull the very air out of the room, reaching deep into the ferociously powerful core of her soul. She unleashed the Queen of the Night aria once more, but this time, it was weaponized. As her voice hit the high F, a note of crystalline purity and terrifying volume, she jammed the microphone against the PA speaker, creating a feedback loop of astronomical proportions. The result was a sonic blast that ripped through the hold. The high-frequency vibration, amplified 1,000 times by the ship's internal acoustics, shattered the glass of the overhead lights. The guards dropped their weapons, clutching their ears as blood began to seep from their eardrums. Even Elder O collapsed to his knees, his silver cane clattering away as the sonic vengeance vibrated the very marrow of his bones. In the chaos, Jun-Su broke free. With the grace of a panther, he disarmed the closest guard and moved through the disorientation. He didn't go for the exit, he went for Elder O. Soyeon didn't stop. She pushed the note higher, her face turning pale with the effort, her eyes locked on the monster who had destroyed her family. The feedback loop grew so intense that the electronic components in the control room sparked and died, plunging the ship into a flickering, red-lit purgatory. Jun-Su reached Elder O, pinning the old man against a shipping container. The game is over, Elder, Jun-Su growled over the fading echoes of Soyeon's scream. The world is listening now. Soyeon lowered the microphone, her throat burning, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked down at the shipping containers. The doors had been jarred loose by the vibration. People were stepping out, blinking in the red light, realizing the nightmare was ending. The waitress had found her voice. And with it, she had brought an empire to its knees. 6 months later, the Seoul Arts Center stood bathed in a different kind of light, not the neon glare of the underworld, but the warm, golden glow of a city reclaiming its soul. Outside, the news tickers that had once whispered of the Syndicate Heir scandal were now broadcasting the sentencing of Elder O and the dismantling of the 7 Stars trafficking network. The ledger and the floorboards had done its work, sparking a national reckoning that reached the highest levels of government. Inside the Grand Theater, the atmosphere was electric. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a homecoming. Soyeon stood behind the heavy velvet curtain, wearing a gown of white silk that moved like water. She wore no diamonds, only her father's simple silver locket and the heavy gold signet ring that had started it all. Her hands, once rough from scrubbing floors, were steady. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She was the woman who had shattered an empire with a single note. Jun-Su waited at the center of the stage, which had been transformed into an altar of lilies and candlelight. He looked every bit the Syndicate Heir, but the predatory curiosity in his eyes had been replaced by a fierce, unwavering devotion. He had spent the last 6 months systematically cleaning his family's business, proving to Soyeon and the world that he was a man capable of change. As the orchestra began the opening strains of Mozart, the curtains parted. Soyeon didn't walk down the aisle, she sang her way down it. She chose the finale of the magic flute, her voice soaring through the rafters, clear and victorious. The audience, a mix of high society, reformed syndicate members, and the waitstaff from the Gilded Crane, stood in stunned silence. When she reached Jun-Su, she didn't wait for the priest to finish the traditional vows. "I'll marry you," she declared, her voice projecting to the very back row without the need for a microphone. A small, defiant smirk played on her lips. "But I'm still waiting for that new uniform you promised me after I spilled the tea." The room erupted in laughter, a sound of pure joy that washed away the shadows of the past. Jun-Su threw his head back and laughed, a sound that was no longer smooth as velvet and sharp as a razor, but warm and human. He leaned in, capturing her lips in a kiss that sealed their partnership. The waitress was gone. The heir had found his match. As the music swelled into a triumphant crescendo, Soyeon Russo Kim and Jun-Su stood together, no longer weapons of war, but architects of a new harmony. In a city built on secrets and noise, they had finally found a truth worth singing about. If you made it this far, you've witnessed how power in the shadows operates, not with loud declarations, but with patience, precision, and the weight of memory. Soyeon Russo Kim's story reminds us that those we dismiss as invisible are often the ones who see everything. She wasn't just a waitress scrubbing dishes and pouring tea, she was a living weapon, carrying her father's ledger hidden in sheet music, waiting for the right moment to bring an empire to its knees. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever watched someone celebrate their victory too early, not knowing you held the trump card all along? Elder O thought he had silenced the Russo Kim bloodline forever, never imagining the daughter would return, not with guns, but with a voice that could shatter crystal and a mind sharp enough to decode the secrets her father left behind. Drop your story in the comments, I read every one, and the best tales of patience and calculated justice deserve to be heard. If this story of buried secrets and deadly memory resonated with you, share it with someone who understands that true power doesn't announce itself, it simply is. Remember, never mistake silence for weakness, invisibility for blindness, or patience for surrender. The next time you see someone pouring your tea, remember that they might be listening to every word, watching every move, waiting for the moment when your arrogance becomes your downfall. The shadows have eyes, and the waitstaff have memory. Until next time, trust your instincts, keep your father's ledgers close, and never underestimate the woman in the cheap uniform. She might just be the most dangerous person in the room, and her first note might be your last breath.